you're watching Gearz, brought to you by Cornwell Tools, the choice of professionals.
Hey, welcome to Gearz. If it looks like we're in the middle of something, well, we are. We're right in the middle of putting that old 1940 Chevy coupe body down on that brand new frame. Now, you might ask, why in the world would you go through all this kind of work? Well, if you compare these frames, old and new, you're going to see that there is a considerable difference. This one, 1940s technology. I mean, look at this suspension front and rear. Also, it comes with 80 years of rust and damage on it. This one, on the other hand, has modern suspension front and rear, much stronger cross members, and much stronger square tubing frame rails. Now, it is possible to bring an old frame like this back up to modern specs. We've shown you how to do it before. But by the time you do that to this frame, you're going to have more time and more money in this than you would in that. That's why a replacement frame is such a great investment for a lot of restorers and builders. Now, you might be asking, so why isn't the body down on the frame yet? Well, replacing a frame is not just a bolt-on sort of deal. No, it's going to take some tweaking depending on how you're setting up the vehicle. Let me show you what I'm talking about. The main area of contact is in the rear with the trunk floor. Now, the rear crossmember was built with a notch to clear the quick change rear end, since we're lowering the car to get the proper stance. Of course, those are the kind of decisions that cause issues elsewhere, like contact with the trunk floor. So the first step is to remove a section of the floor so the body will drop down on the frame properly. First, we'll mark the side cuts in the floor, making sure we're far enough back to clear the rear end, not just the crossmember. Then we'll make the preliminary cuts with a cutoff wheel. Next, we'll transfer the body back to the old frame to make the final cuts. Remember when I recommended that you have to have at least 3 bays before you take on a level 4 frame-off project? This is why. Using the old frame to hold the body when you work will protect the new frame from sparks and damage. Okay, with the cuts made, we'll set the body back on the new frame and see what we have. As you can see, the trunk floor now clears the crossmember and the quick change rear end, and the body sits down on the frame like it should. Okay, with the rear taken care of, the next place to check for clearance issues is the center floor, the crossmembers, and the transmission. And as you can see, all the crossmembers clear the body, and the floor opening is actually large enough to access the 5-speed tranny. Moving forward, you can also see there's plenty of room around the bell housing and the firewall. Heck, if these old floors weren't rusty and needing to be replaced, we could actually take this center cover, cut an opening in it like this, and it would fit right over that TKX, and we'd be good to go. That would be fine if we were just building a beater, but that's not what we're doing. So there are some other things to consider here. Take a look. Now, anytime you put a V8 into an early car, firewall clearance is going to be an issue. As you can see, we are really close over here on the passenger side head, and around the distributor is usually a problem area as well. Now, this is where a lot of guys will take a big old hammer and bang on the firewall to get the clearance they need. Not only is that going to look bad, but that really doesn't fix the problem. So, like we said before, we're going to get a new replacement firewall from EMS that already has a big recess built right into it to clear the V8. It's also going to clear a bunch of these holes and dents so it's nice and smooth. And it's going to fit real well with the EMS floors and rockers that we're going to put in the rest of the car. So we're going to get into that metal work after we finish all of this fitment. Keep in mind, anytime you're fitting a body onto a new frame, be prepared to do some shimming and gapping to get everything squared up and fitting right. Okay, with the body loosely mounted, we can finally see how the body and frame look together. Now that is what it's supposed to look like. Now, I know you're probably wondering about that trunk floor and that huge hole that we cut in it. Well, fortunately, there are replacement floor pans available for the trunks of 40 Chevys, and they do away with this drop center for the old spare tire. Now, the trunk floor will come back from here, so it will clear the sway bar and the cross member, and then just come straight back all the way here for a nice clean look. The only thing we'll have to do is a little notch here for the cross member. So, that's yet another thing to put on the list that we have to do when we replace the firewall, the floors, the rockers, and that kind of thing. And that's a great example of how one decision that you make on a project, like putting a quick change rear end in, can affect things all the way down the line. That's why the fitting stage that we're doing now is so important.
Metal. It's one of the key components of what we build and fabricate with. But if you can't shape it and cut it, you can't build with it. For over 50 years, Woodward Fab has been supplying the tools and technical advice to get the job done right. Bead rollers, brakes, shears, tubing benders. You'll find what you need whether you're a professional metal worker or just starting out. Woodward Fab, shaping metal since 1966.
Hey, welcome back to Gearz. As you can see, we have the body sitting down on the new frame of our 1940 Chevy Coupe. Now it's time to fit this front sheet metal. And you know there's going to be some tweaking and trimming that we're going to have to do to make this fit just like we had to do with the body. So let's get it on the hoist, see what we got. As you can see, we have got some serious clearance issues with the inner fenders, which is to be expected with the new front suspension. But a little trimming on these inner fenders should solve the problem. Some simple measurements of the front suspension components is all that's required to make a pattern out of cardboard. Then we'll just transfer the pattern to the inner fenders and make the cuts. If all goes well, the front sheet metal should slide in place with the inner fenders fitting nicely around the suspension. Now, as you can see, this is starting to look like a car again, with a much better stance. Now, obviously, there is a lot of shimming and adjusting involved in lining up a body with front sheet metal and making it perfect. And we're going to do all that. But for now, we just dropped this in place, and it is lining up really good, which is great for a preliminary fit. Now, before we celebrate too much, though, there is one other thing we have to fit in here, the radiator. Now, obviously, most 30s and 40s era vehicles are notorious for having long, tall radiators that don't do a real good job cooling V8s. That's why most early hot rods had overheating problems. So, rather than mess with anything that came from the factory, we went to Champion Cooling Systems and got us an aluminum radiator. Now, look at this. Champion builds radiators for over 15,000 vehicles, so they're direct fit. And as you can see, all aluminum construction, TIG welded. They have the inlets and outlets in place. You got the mounting brackets on. Even have the bungs for the automatic transmission, which of course we're not going to use. Now we also got a stainless overflow tank and an electric fan and a controller. and this will cool that hot V8 engine and air conditioning. The question though, is this fan and radiator going to fit that Holley accessory system? There's only one way to find out. As you can see, the radiator drops in and bolts up to the factory holes with no problems. That's a good thing. The electric fan is a tight fit, but we ended up with just enough clearance to be able to replace the belt, and that's all we needed. Well, hopefully this gives you an idea of what's involved in bolting an old body down on a new frame. As you can see, it's a lot more than a bolt-on. Yeah, you have to make sure it's going to fit the rear end, the exhaust system, the shifter, the transmission, the bell housing, the engine. You need to consider your headers. You need to look at the accessories, the radiator, the suspension. Heck, even the hood and the hood sides can be a factor when you're doing this pre-fit stage. But once you have everything fitting, you'll be able to step back and get the first good look of what it is you're actually building. And that's exciting. And that's good. You need to hold on to that excitement because there's still a long way to go before you can actually drive this thing.
If you like cars, if you like coffee, you're gonna love Gearz coffee cars. Because in each pack, you'll find a special blend of rich, robust coffee to get your blood pumping, as well as a collectible cartoon sticker and matching photo card of some of the wildest vehicles Stacey has built or featured over the years. Collect the whole series and be sure to keep an eye out for the ultra-rare Strange Brew card that are added to random packages to keep things interesting. It's Gearz coffee cars, the best bean on the car scene.
You know, sometimes some of the most rewarding things that you can do to old cars and trucks is just those simple problem-solving things to get them running and operating again. For example, this little guy here, this is not a Jeep. No, this is an early 60s Mighty Mite. Look at that face. The Mighty Mite was a hardcore off-road vehicle that was built by AMC for the Marine Corps to go anywhere that the Marines could go in Vietnam. It's all aluminum body, super short wheelbase, four-wheel drive, four-wheel independent suspension, and aluminum air-cooled V4 engine made the Mighty Mite a 1,700-pound force to be reckoned with. And with only about 4,000 made, they are very collectible today. Unfortunately, like most military vehicles, this one's been hacked on over the years. And we got it as a non-runner with the hopes of bringing it back to life. And since this is the only Mighty Mite known to exist with a fiberglass hardtop, it's definitely worth saving. Okay, the first thing that we're going to deal with is the fuel issue. Now, as you can see, somebody has put an aftermarket regulator and electric fuel pump on this thing, but if you're running a carburetor and an electric fuel pump, you need more than just a regulator. Take a look. You're not only going to need a fuel pressure regulator, but you're also going to need a fuel pressure gauge to monitor the pressure that's coming out of the regulator, as well as a fuel filter. And when you buy these, this is how they come from the aftermarket. I mean, there's no mounting brackets, there's nothing, they're just there. So most people just mount them in line and let them bang against the fender. And obviously that's not a good thing. So we're going to show you how to make a simple bracket to mount all of these components using some scrap and some tools that you probably have laying around the shop. Okay, first we're going to decide where we're going to mount everything. And right here is perfect because it's out of the way and it's easy to see when you open the hood. Next, you'll need a brass T-fitting and a threaded extension, a couple of hose nipples. Then, of course, you'll need some fuel line and some hose clamps. And finally, a piece of 1-inch square tubing. Now, take the square tubing and cut it to length. And then notch it to hold the T-fitting. Now, I'm using a bandsaw to make the cuts, but a simple hacksaw will work just as well. Then, to true up the cuts, grab a file and go to work. The goal is for the notch to fit snugly around the T-fitting. Now, to hold the fitting in the notch in the tubing, we made a simple cap out of scrap metal with a square hole to match the fitting. Next, remove a lower section of the tubing and drill mounting holes in the backside. Then, tap the hole for the cap and paint the bracket. Once it's dry, assemble the regulator to the T-fitting, then mount the T-fitting inside the new bracket. Now just bolt the bracket in the vehicle and add the pressure gauge to the top of the T-fitting, and finally the filter mounts to the other side of the T-fitting and flows to the carburetor. You know, one of the first true freedoms you experience as a kid is that first bicycle. Man, it becomes your transportation to the world, or at least the local neighborhood. And in my neighborhood, man, we all had bikes. And we'd stick playing cards in the spokes, and we'd suck on black licorice, make it look like we were big biker dudes, and it was magic. But a bike wasn't just about transportation. No, it became an extension of your personality. And there were all kinds of bikes out there. There were 10 speeds, there were mountain bikes, there were Stingrays, there were BMX bikes, and they all had their strengths and weaknesses. And that's where the idea for the story of the purple bicycle came from. Because just like a bike might wish it had the talents or skills of another bike, so do we sometimes overlook our God-given talents and wish we had somebody else's talents, skills, because they seem to be better than ours. It's a simple lesson, but something we all need to be reminded of from time to time. Hey, welcome back to Gearz, where we have just shown you a cool way how to mount a fuel pressure regulator, a fuel pressure gauge, and a fuel filter on an older vehicle like this. Now, as you can see, the bracket that we made allowed us to mount all three of those components right there in front for easy access. Then, of course, we cleaned up the wiring, added some batteries, and we changed the oil. So now we're ready to put some fire to this thing and see if we can get it to run. Provided I can get in it. I mean, this thing is tiny. Now, getting in a Mighty Mite for anybody that's over 6 feet tall is all about positioning your body parts in the right order at the right place. You can't put the leg in first, you're never gonna make it in. You gotta go in with the body first, then the leg comes in, then you slide in, and then you try to, I mean, this, this is tight. Man, this is tight. And there's no floor drop, as you can see. But how cool is this? When we turned the key, it was nice to hear the fuel pump kick on and see the components that we installed start to work. When we hit the starter, the little V4 roared to life and held some great oil pressure. Matter of fact, the throttle response is surprising on this thing. So despite the fact that we had virtually no brakes and no safety gear,
now you know there's no seat belts in this
thing. We couldn't resist taking it out and running it through some paces. And this little four-wheel drive, all-independent suspension rig will literally go almost anywhere. The only drawback is you really need to be less than 6 feet tall and have arms like a Marine to drive this thing. One big surprise was the V4 engine. It had an amazing amount of torque, and coupled with the low gearing, it would allow the Mite to pull some seriously steep inclines.
This is where the Mighty Mite is awesome.
The wide stance and independent suspension and all-wheel drive gave the Mighty Mite incredible traction, and it felt really stable and less tippy on side hills than something bigger like an old Willys Jeep or the old Ford Bronco. And the super short wheelbase definitely makes it more nimble than any other vintage military rig I've driven, provided you can turn the steering wheel.
That's why this was made for the Marine Corps.
Only those guys could drive these things. But probably the most shocking was out on the road. The snappy little V4 is definitely capable of pushing this 1,800-pound rig to the proclaimed 60-mile-an-hour top speed. But not today, not on these brakes, and not on these tires.
What are you working on? Brought to you by Woodward Fabrication, selling quality metalworking equipment since 1966.
Today's What Are You Working On comes from Mike, and he is from Berkeley, California. And his project is maybe not what you might expect from a California hot rodder. Check this out. It's an 85 Ford LTD. Not just one. He's got two of them. Check them out here. Now, one of them is a former police car. So it's got the factory 5-liter high-output engine, automatic track lock rear end, all the good stuff. And he is in the process of transferring all of the good stuff into his other LTD. It's a great project. Now, Mike, obviously, you can see in the background, he works on Corvettes, Trans Ams, other hot rods, but there's something about these LTDs that he loved. And it's that comfort, speed, but it's also those cop tires, the cop engine, the cop brakes, you know, the Blues Brothers thing. Now, he says the reason I love this car is said that his dad, who passed away, also loved it and loves showing off all the custom work that he's done to it. Now, he says he plans on hitting the autocross with it when it's done. He wants to do a hot rod power tour and, of course, like he said, daily drive it. Now, so far, he's rewired it. He's rebuilt the original engine. He's added MSD full ignition. He's upgraded the charging and the wiring and the cooling system, added long tube headers, and he did, here's my favorite, he did a complete 5-speed manual transmission. Okay, just imagine an LTD with a stick and a V8. That's awesome. Man, that's hot rodding. And to recognize that, we are going to give you one of these big vices from Woodward Fab. I'm telling you, you will find use for this thing. Everybody needs a big vise like that. Also, we're going to give you one of these, not the SR71. We're going to give you the fender cover so you can lay it on there and protect that car once you get it painted. And then we're also going to give you a project planning book so you can keep track of everything that you're doing on that car. Going to be very important when you're swapping parts from car to car like that. And then finally, we're going to give you a copperhead die cast. Now, for the rest of you guys, if you want to get in on this and get your projects featured on the show, you got to send them to us. Go to our website, go to Gearz Nation, and submit it into What Are You Working On? The website's also the place to find out more information on any products you may have seen on the show, any Gearz merchandise, and how to join Gearz Nation. Also, make sure you check out our social media. That's Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube, all at Official Stacey David. YouTube is also the place to view all of your favorite Gearz episodes, as well as the Gearz Restoration Series and our full project builds that follow a project from beginning to end. And finally, if you're a radio person, be sure and check out our podcast, Tales of a Gearhead. All right, that wraps it up for us today. Hopefully this inspires you to get out there and work on something yourself. It can be a hot rod, it can be an old military vehicle, heck, it can even be an LTD. It's all good. Get out there, start working on something. We'll see you next time.